Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey, this is Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Men podcast. I am here with Dr. Paula Hall from the UK. We're super excited to have this interesting discussion. Dr. Hall, should I call you Dr. Paula or Dr. Hall?
You can just call me Paula. Just call me Paula, please.
Oh, okay. All right. So Paula is a sexual and relationship psychotherapist at the Laurel Center. She specializes in sex addiction and related issues, founder of the Hall Recovery Course programs for people with sex and porn addiction and their partners around the UK. You also do training. She also does training for other addiction therapists and professionals around Europe and the UK. So I'll let her kind of fill in the gaps, but this is an interesting topic. Our goal at Maxed Out Man is just to kind of inspire and educate men. And I think this is kind of the don't ask, don't tell thing that so many men deal with. And I think the world kind of tells us that it's just not that big a deal. And I think that a lot of men, I think that it's more hurtful and more of an issue than what most people believe. So, just fill us in on the gaps on your background and what you do, and then we can kind of get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a therapist for about 30 years now. Started in drug and alcohol work, and then I specialized in doing kind of relationship stuff and sex stuff. And yeah, it was probably about 15, 18 years ago, started having clients turning up at the door saying they were really struggling with infidelity, basically. And we're going back to before porn was on broadband. And I did all the usual psychotherapy stuff, looking at their childhood, relationship with their mum. It's always your mum's fault. Looking at all that kind of stuff. And basically what happened were these guys were like having a better understanding of why they were a compulsive cheat, but it didn't actually change the behavior. And then I started hearing about this thing called sex addiction, and it just kind of made sense for me with some of these clients that I'd been seeing. So I started specializing it, and I've since then written the books about it that are most widely used in the UK and Europe. As I say, set up training centres. So the Laurel Centre, which is where I do most of the therapy, we are growing so fast because we just cannot keep up with the demand. And most recently, what I've done is founded something called Pivotal Recovery, which is a not-for-profit organisation to provide low-cost, affordable support. Porn addiction particularly, since we've had broadband, the problem is going through the roof, and it is just not slowing down at all.
Well, and that's what it came to mind. I mean, I wonder what happened 17 to 18 years ago that would begin this process, right? It was the internet was, early 2000s. So seems like that coincides quite readily.
Absolutely. And then, of course, on top of that, you've got the smartphone. So you haven't even got to, open up your computer and open up a window anymore. It's all on your smartphone. This porn and sexual services. So for a lot of people, what we see is that it starts off with pornography, but then quite often it escalates to other behaviours. Because I'm not going to assume you don't know about this stuff, Kevin, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do. And the vast majority of porn is free. Yeah, you don't pay for porn these days. It's all free.
Yeah.
And it's all about upselling once you're on those sites to the paid for stuff. And that is the adult apps, the sex worker, the chat, the webcams, the more dodgy porn, the more serious porn. That's how they get their money. It's all about hooking you in and getting you looking at that other stuff. And it's good old clever marketing. And we know about this from buying anything on the internet. And that's how they're getting people. And some people are more susceptible to this becoming compulsive than others. But it's the opportunity, the availability, and the availability kind of alongside a lack of education as well that is really making this go through the roof. Because exactly as you said in the intro, we're not really talking about this.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is the availability. I'm 50. So when I was younger, if you wanted to get access to any of that stuff, maybe you found it under your older brother's bed or your dad's closet or whatever, or you had to physically go to a store and try to sneak something or whatever, and now literally you can sit in a closet with your smartphone and have access to ungodly amount of stuff.
Exactly. And the thing that we know about
And
addictions, the thing we know about addictions is that they accelerate really fast when you have a lot of novelty. Okay, and this is all to do with the neuroscience of addiction. And when you used to go off to that shop and highly embarrassed and get the top shelf magazine, you had that one magazine that probably lasted you for weeks and weeks and weeks. You didn't have the endless novelty and variety that's available on the internet within a click of a button. And that is what makes it so addictive. So it's not, pornography is probably addictive anyway, even good old fashioned paper porn, but basically you couldn't access it fast enough. So it never really took off. But once you put it on the internet, it's a whole different drug.
Yeah. And can you explain kind of the progression that a lot of people that have an addictive, my parents are alcoholics, drugs, all of that stuff. I would consider myself to have a relatively addictive personality. Like I could do that, but I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't, my drug of choice is probably too much caffeine. And sugar. I love sugar. So those are kind of my, the healthier addictions, I guess. But I'm interested if you can kind of, just so that, people listening can say, hey, I'm kind of in this stage, or these are some of my predispositions. These are some ways that I need to kind of be aware. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the thing to understand, of course, is that there are millions and millions of people out there using pornography recreationally without it causing a problem. In the same way as there are millions of people out there who drink alcohol recreationally and it doesn't cause a problem. Sometimes they drink a little bit too much and it does, but they manage to kind of get themselves in check again. They manage to get on top of it. They pull themselves together and it's fine. Different stages of your life, lockdown, you end up drinking too much every night. Maybe that was just me, but certainly that happened. But then things change again and you get back to normal and you get on an even keel. So what happens with pornography use is very, very similar, really. For most people, it starts as recreational. Yeah. And particularly in adolescence, I mean, this stuff's like, the most exciting thing you've ever seen in your life when you're an adolescent. Exactly the same as the first beer was the best thing ever. Tasted vile, but it seemed to make you feel good. I think it starts off really, really good and really, really great, and it starts off recreationally for most people. But what can happen is that pornography, like lots of these other substances, starts being used as a way of managing uncomfortable emotions. So you're feeling a bit sad and down, you're feeling a bit anxious, you're feeling a bit lonely, you're feeling rejected, and you turn to your drug of choice, whether that's opening the cookie barrel or having a drink or whatever it was. Cigarettes were my vice for many, many years. Um, and that's kind of okay if you turn to these things sometimes, but the problem is when it becomes your primary coping mechanism, when that's the only thing you ever go to. And the point at which you really know that it's an addiction, and this is the challenge with porn compared to some of the other things. If we were talking about alcohol, we could talk about how many units. Yeah. If we're talking about food and sugar, we can talk about how many calories. We can talk about how many inches there are around your waist. There are things that we can really measure it by. If we're talking about drugs, it's the amount of, quite aside from the legality, but we can talk about the number of come downs that you're having, all that kind of stuff. So it's much, much easier to measure. But when you're talking about porn, those side effects, if you like, are much more subtle. So what I see so often in my practice is guys and it is primarily guys, that's maybe another question, but we're on maxed out men, so maybe not. So many guys, they say that it started off recreationally and actually, yeah, they were using probably quite a lot of porn, but it wasn't causing any problems in their life. But then they tried to get into a relationship. Or maybe they were in a relationship and they realized actually they were going off sex with their partner. Some of them having problems
Mm.
getting an erection, getting aroused, getting in the mood, because they got so used to porn and the variety of porn that actually their partner just, wasn't enough anymore. And no partner will ever be able to compete with porn and the variety of porn. They then start noticing that they're flicking on the computer and they're looking at porn when they really ought to be getting on with work. Yeah, they really should be working.
Mm.
They're
Yeah.
looking at porn, making excuses to go home early from being out with friends, making, some other event they're meant to be. So it really starts getting in the way of love. And that's when you start noticing the lengths that you will go to get those opportunities. And it's escalating. It's not just porn now, it's the chat. You're on the chat lines, you're on the other stuff, you're looking at more hardcore stuff. It's breaking your own values and you're becoming more dependent. But it's a lot more subtle than some of the other addictive chemicals and behaviors. With gambling, which would be another process addiction or behavioral addiction, you can tell by how fast your bank balance is going down. Again, it's really obvious side effects. You don't have it in this one. So I think going back to your question, how do you know? Is it getting in the way of other areas of life? Things, other better things you could be doing with your time, but you're not because you're looking at porn. Is it crossing your own values? Not necessarily because you think porn is wrong, but maybe you do. But maybe it's crossing your values because you're turning down other things that are important to you. You're lying to your partner in order to do this. Is it breaking your own value system? Is it beginning to get worse and you're really crossing more boundaries? And the really critical question is, and in spite of all of that, can you not stop or reliably cut down? And that's the real
Hmm.
critical thing about addiction, is when you can't control it, you can't reliably manage it. That's how you know when you're addicted.
Yeah, that's I love that kind of walkthrough of it's really it's more of a qualitative recognition than a quantitative one. I mean, you could, if you're on OnlyFans or whatever, and you're spending $1,000 a month on OnlyFans, which, the fact that OnlyFans, those girls make as much money as they do is kind of crazy. But there's a quantitative component there. But I think that it seems like that's crazy that you really have no start, progression, cause and effect. That there's not a direct correlation in cause and effect between this beginning of the addiction and that progression, other than emotionally. And like you're saying, if you're leaving work early, that can probably be quantitative, because you may get
Mm.
less promotions. You may actually lose your job because you're not performing as you should. Now, so is it what is the percentage of men versus women? I'd be interested, because it's and why is that? Is that a testosterone that drives those behaviors? I mean, obviously testosterone is the main driving sex hormone with all
Mm.
of those with men. Is that kind of what the science would say about why there's so many more men than women?
No, absolutely not. I'm really glad you raised that, though. The thing with sex and porn addiction is it's got nothing to do with sex. That's the other way that you realise that you've got a problem. Yeah, you volunteered being a bit of a sugar addict a bit earlier there, Kevin. How often do you eat
Right.
cookies and cake because you're hungry? Nah, you don't have to be hungry to
Yeah,
eat it.
rarely,
You eat
rarely.
it
Yeah.
because it tastes good, it fills you up, it gives you a bit of a buzz. It has nothing to do with appetite. Yeah. Sometimes, if you're hungry, you might decide to have a bit of cake. But if you're honest, you know damn well this has got nothing to do with your appetite. And the same is true around porn addiction, particularly. It is not governed by testosterone. Yeah, it's not about genital arousal, it's about arousal in the brain. It's about a chemical called dopamine, which is the common denominator in all addictions. So many
Mm-hmm.
guys I work with, I say, look, if you are genuinely horny, if that's genuinely what's going on for you, and not sure how explicit I can be, but you need to, relieve yourself, whatever, fine, but just don't look at porn. And it's amazing how many then go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, I won't bother then. And I don't know if you've got kids, but I certainly remember when my kids were little, my daughter used to come and say, oh, Mummy, I'm hungry, I'm really hungry. I said, okay, do you want a banana? No, I'm not hungry for a banana, I'm just hungry for biscuits. And it's like, you're not hungry. Yeah. So
Right.
if
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
worth
I do.
it
I have
without
two
porn,
I have two adult kids. So just, yeah. So
yeah,
I'm right there with you. I think, that's really interesting to know, because that would be a misconception, obviously, that I have. This is not my expertise. So is there a dopamine response? I'm trying to get to that kind of men versus women thing.
yeah.
Obviously,
Okay,
there's
so
always been a component,
yeah. So what the research tells us is, and this has been pretty consistent across lots of different countries. There's a new bit of research hot off the press, but it's not actually, well, it's not off the press yet, so I can't actually talk about it, which is really annoying. But yeah, next time. But the research we have that is coming out across countries is saying that it's very, very similar all around the world. About 30% of the people that present with sex and porn addiction are female. And even so it's about a third, but a much smaller proportion of them reach out for help, which is really interesting. And I think I have a hypothesis, well, two hypotheses for why. One is, if you're a female sex addict, you're on OnlyFans, you're making money out of this. You are enjoying it, and the more you do it, the more money you make. And remember, there probably aren't any harmful consequences until the point where you try and stop, you're trying to get into a relationship, and your partner says, I don't think I want you on OnlyFans anymore. That's when you might realize you've got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So for a lot of women, they can actually make money out of this, and they are probably working in the sex industry. Yeah. So actually, it's not a problem for them right now because there aren't any very obvious harmful side effects. The problem is when they try and come out of the porn industry, and that's been some of the female clients that I've worked with. But the other hypothesis is that it is much, much harder for women to come forward with compulsive sexual behaviours because of the way the society views female sexuality. You guys, you've got a high sex drive, you're addicted to porn, you're addicted to sex. What society says is, oh, well, aren't you all sex addicts? Well, come on, that's all you ever think about 24/7. It's kind of a bit of a joke. And if you're a guy and you're out a lot, you're a bit of a player, you're a bit of a lad. If you're a woman, you're a slut, you're a whore. Yeah. We have very, very different terms for women. So I think there's considerably more stigma for women, and therefore it's much harder for them to reach out for help. What we do know is if you compare the behaviours of male and female sex addicts, they are slightly different. So women are far more likely to be the exhibitionists, and men are far more likely to be the voyeurs. And we kind of know that. You only have to go to a bar and you can see that that's happening. Women are the ones, showing themselves off, whatever, and men are the ones that are looking. So we know that is a significant gender difference. So porn is more aimed at men. There are more male porn addicts than women because men there's a bigger preoptic nerve. There's all sorts of gender differences why men are more likely to be attracted to porn. Also, the vast majority of people that produce porn are men. So there are some female-friendly porn sites where it's more aimed at women, but most of those you have to pay for, and they're harder to access. So in part, it's because the industry is aimed at men, and hence it sort of perpetuates it. But men are more into porn. Women are going to be more into other forms of sexual behaviours. So yeah, it is still predominantly men that are reaching out for help.
Well, that's interesting, and probably makes it even more difficult for women to kind of seek help and seek treatment if there are it's the opposite of consequences on the surface. Obviously, there's a major emotional consequences, long term relational consequences. But if I never even thought about that if you're, if someone they can profit from it, which I'm assuming has been the case all along with prostitution. However, that's a much more, I guess, not necessarily emotionally involved, but clearly physically involved than just sitting in front of a webcam taking $20 a month or whatever from each person, however much that they get. But yeah, that's got to make that quite difficult for women that have, I mean, I guess it's difficult. I think probably now, do they just go through, how long does it take for them to kind of figure out that this is a problem when they're making, $1 million a year through their addiction?
Yeah, quite. And would you actually call it an addiction if you don't have a problem with it? If you're a multi-millionaire and you're a gambling addict and you're losing 10,000 a month, but you can afford it, are you an addict? Probably you're an addict, but you don't have a problem. So, I mean, they're not coming forward. It's not a problem until it's a problem. I mean, you kind of jokingly said about the softer addictions of caffeine. Ditto. I'm a caffeine addict. I mean, apart from maybe needing to go to the loo a bit more often in the night and being a bit fidgety, there aren't really any serious side effects to being a caffeine addict. So we don't worry about it. And I can tell you, if they found out that cigarettes weren't harmful, if they, for example, found out tomorrow that actually it was something in the paper that caused cancer, and now they've changed it, so actually cigarettes are now 100% safe, I'd buy them again tomorrow. The only reason
because it's not a problem, right? Yeah,
exactly. The only reason I don't smoke is because it will kill me. But otherwise, I'd be so some things we only use the language of addiction when it's causing problems. So some people talk about shopping addiction now, and can shopping become an addiction? Yeah, if you're running into compulsive debt, absolutely. If you can afford, and this is much more of a female addiction, if you can afford a wardrobe full of shoes, we don't call it a problem. But if you're living on benefits and you've got a wardrobe full of shoes, you've got a problem. So it's only when we really have those harmful consequences that we talk the language of addiction.
But that doesn't mean there's not a problem. It just means that the actual addict doesn't see the problem, or there's no real major consequences.
So back to the neuroscience. What's happening is your brain is becoming more and more wired up to whatever that substance or behavior is. Yeah, you'll know this if you've tried to give up sugar or give up caffeine. You really do start getting some withdrawal symptoms. Yeah, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
For people who just don't drink caffeine, apparently they exist. Don't know many of them, but apparently they're out there somewhere.
They're weird. Those are weirdos, right?
Those weirdos, those freaks. They've got a problem. But yeah, the people who don't ever drink caffeine or don't ever have sugar aren't constantly craving it. Yeah, you said you don't drink alcohol. You're not constantly craving it like an alcoholic would, because if you don't, you don't, because the neural pathway in your brain begins to die away. It's just not there. It's just not a problem. So those people who are compulsively shopping or watching whatever those behaviors may be, but aren't experiencing any direct problems, their brain is getting mega wired up. Their brain is addicted. But because there are no psychological, emotional, relational, social impacts from it, it doesn't matter. And in some respects, this brain bit, if you wanted to become a brilliant piano player, you might be actually, but assuming you're not, and you wanted to become a brilliant piano player, right? Then what you would do is practice. Yeah. You'd practice. And when we practice a behavior, it creates a neural pathway in the brain that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So someone who's brilliant at playing the piano just has to flip up that lid. I wish I hadn't used this metaphor. I don't know enough about playing pianos, but lift up the lid, fingers are in the right place, they're off. Don't have to think about it. Yeah. I couldn't even play chopsticks because I don't have that neural pathway. But we don't use the language of addiction. It's exactly the same process. Yeah. The person that learnt to play the piano built those neural pathways by constantly repeating the same behavior. But we don't use the language of addiction because there aren't any harmful consequences. So someone who becomes addicted to a behavior, they've created that really strong neural pathway, and we use the language of addiction because of it. It's slightly more complicated than that. If there's any neuroscientists out there who are going, that woman doesn't know what she's talking about, I know it's slightly more complicated and there's various other chemicals that come into play, but that's it in a nutshell. So addictions are about
Yeah,
learnt behavior, and that is how we practice at them a lot, and that's how we develop those strong neural pathways. But unless there are additional harmful consequences to that, we don't use the language of addiction. We don't say it's a problem. And that
that's
is,
interesting. Yeah, I think.
I was going to say
Go ahead.
that
Go
that
ahead.
is the challenge. That's the challenge that we as a society are having and are going to increasingly have with young people, because there is a whole generation of young people out there, and increasingly the girls as well as the guys, who are using and accessing pornography on their mobile devices on a regular basis, building those neural pathways all the time. And there's very few direct consequences because they're not at work, they've got a lot more time, it's not particularly an issue. And those brains are becoming hardwired to porn. And it's not until often they're in their early mid 20s, late 20s, that they're then turning up to us for help, going, how the hell did I get here? And it's 15 years of usage building up those neural pathways, and then suddenly it hits. And that's why we've got to have more education.
Yeah, it's really scary. I don't spend a lot of time on TikTok, just because I'm not the right age group. But we do business on there, so I go on there occasionally. And being a man, because that's what's in my demographic profile, it's all. I have constantly have to hit this button that says not interested, right? I'm trying to clean up my feed because it's teenage, late teen, 20-year-old girls with half shirts on with their breasts hanging out the bottom of their shirts, right? So it's
Yeah,
just, even going on Facebook, it's similar stuff. It's just this bombardment of
absolutely.
imagery and ideology, really. And it's just become this rampant thing. So it's a little scary that we won't really know the effects societally for a couple of decades.
Yeah,
I think on what we're doing now. I think what's ironic is that we're concerned with privacy issues and all of those of some of these social media sites, which I think is important also. But I think we're missing the emotional component that really affects us societally. I think there's a major problem coming.
yeah.
And obviously we've seen major anxiety from social media and all that. So as I understand it, when you're talking about the neural pathway, I'm a kind of science nerd with that stuff. So my degree's in exercise physiology. My, my, uh, my understanding is that for caffeine, for example, the caffeine molecule actually replaces, and I can't remember whatever receptor it is, whether it's dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, or one of those. It actually kind of fills that hole in for you in your brain, and that's where the headaches come from. And that I don't know. I don't even know if that's true, but my assumption is that that's a similar neural pathway situation when it comes to any addictive behavior. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. All of those, all of the substances and the behaviours that give us a bit of a high, give us a bit of a dopamine hit to a lesser or greater extent. And yeah, and some are more harmful than others. So obviously, crack cocaine gives you a massive dopamine hit and is highly addictive because of it. And I think the back to the kind of lack of education. We do talk to young people about the risks of smoking, the risks of alcohol. We don't stop them trying. Let's be honest. We talk about illegal drugs. They're still going to
Right.
try it. Some of them. That's just how it is. But we educate them about the risks. There are highly addictive substances out there, and porn on the internet is now one of them, and we've got to make it easier for young people to understand what the potential risks are. And I suppose that's what I get quite angry about, is that we don't even talk about the potential risk. And I think it's so easy in this field for people to think you're moralizing about pornography and you must be anti-porn. And I work really hard to kind of keep my personal value system kind of out of it, because when we start getting into the values of porn, we then lose the impact that it is having on ordinary, everyday guys. It then becomes that they shouldn't be
Yeah.
doing this bad, evil thing, rather than actually looking at the mental health impact that it has. And we don't moralize about alcohol in the same way, it's, or any of the other behaviors, but we really do around porn.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that, I've been married for 28 years, very happily. Porn is not an issue in my life, but I know even in men's circles that are talking about, sexual performance and how to be a better lover and all of these things, they talk a lot about the harm that it does to your relationships as a guy. And actually, if you kind of put it in perspective of, hey, if you're in a committed, and we'll just use marriage for an example, if I knew that a behavior was directly impacting my spouse in a negative way, would I continue that behavior? And does that become a problem? And I think what a lot of men are missing is that, even if it's more than a casual use of pornography, there is an effect on your perception, those pathways. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I've been hearing. And it actually affects your relationship, especially, overall your relationship with your spouse, with your wife, because of what you're taught about men and women's relationship, whether it be some sort of dominance thing or just how you see their value, but especially sexual intimacy is going to make a huge difference in that, because you're seeing, like everything else on the internet, it's 100% fake. Like you judge yourself on your performance and, physical aspects and all of those things. So are you seeing some of that? I know that you deal primarily with kind of the other end of the continuum, but do you see some of that, and can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we do, and again, there are, it's getting the balance here, because there are lots of people who aren't impacted by it, who are. I always think, but porn is the edited highlight, isn't it? Yeah, there's no cup of tea afterwards. There's no having to empty the dishwasher first, or whatever. Yeah, it's just the edited highlights, and some of it's a bit more extreme, but it's a bit like watching any kind of drama on the telly or any Hollywood film. You just see the main bits. And there are a lot of people out there who know that. They know this is not real life. They get that. And actually, I think particularly young people can be a bit offended when us grown-ups try and say, you do realise it's not like that in real life. And they're like, oh no, next thing you'll be telling me that I can't drive like Grand Theft Auto. I thought that's how it was. It's they just think we're stupid needing to tell them that, because they know that. So there are guys who sometimes use porn and it doesn't impact their relationships, but I think there are a lot where it does, and of course there are some couples who use porn together, and that's part of their sex life. That's what they do, and that's absolutely fine. But I think it is about being aware that it is skewed in a certain direction. There is some porn that is certainly better than others, and that again is the challenge, isn't it? Because we're just talking about this term porn, which includes a vast range of different things, and there is no doubt that some of it is phenomenally harmful. I mean, obviously the underage images, the child sex abuse images being
Hmm.
perhaps the most extreme, but some of it is phenomenally harmful, and we hear the stories in the press of young people, particularly, thinking that being choked is normal, thinking that trying to choke your girlfriend is, oh, I thought you'd like that. I thought that's what I saw on. So some of this stuff we know is
Right.
out there and is really, really damaging for sure. And again, it goes back to the education really, because you can't make an informed decision about something unless you're educated, unless you've got that stuff. And I guess one of the things that is so different, of course, for people of our generation, a bit younger, is we remember the world before internet porn, and probably before, well, definitely if
Hmm.
you're 50, by the time you saw internet porn, you already had a sexual relationship. You already knew what that was like.
Hmm.
There's a whole generation coming out where that is where they're getting their sex education. They have no idea that it's any
Hmm.
different from that. And that is what is so challenging. So you know that what you see is different from the relationship you have and the relationship that you want, because you have got that prior experience. But there's a generation of people that are coming through who don't necessarily have that.
Yeah, I saw some statistic where they said it was under 30 or under 25 that they get 53% of their quote unquote information from TikTok.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was like, that is obviously I'm a I'm a skeptic when it comes to production level media in general, but when you're talking about that kind of stuff, when you're literally producing these short form the short form content, and like you say, if everybody under the age of 25, boys especially, we'll call them boys, think that choking your girlfriend is a normal experience, then that
yeah,
also begins to teach the young girls that that's a normal part of a healthy quote unquote sexual relationship. I mean,
yeah,
that's a scary thing, because it seems like it's gonna, that is, if you want to call it bedroom violence. I mean, obviously BDSM is a component can be a component of just your normal sexual relationship
yeah,
or not, but
yeah.
that seems to be creating this kind of society of young men that see violence as part of the erotic experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. Pivotal Recovery, which is as I say, it's the a not-for-profit that I set up. And one of the reasons for setting up was so that the profit that we do get from it, we can invest into education, because I think it's so important to be
Mm.
investing in education and research. So that's one of the reasons that we set up Pivotal. Um, and the other to offer low cost, very easily, anonymously accessible support and help for people that are struggling. Um, but one of the things we were just looking at recently, so Pivotal Recovery was only launched towards the end of last year. We're just about to go into a big pilot stage, so we're still pretty new. Is looking at where we market ourselves, and we're looking at TikTok, and it's kind of like.
Mm.
It's my husband and I set up Pivotal Recovery together, and he's got a background in media and in video production. That's what he's done. He's recorded all the podcasts, because Pivotal's a podcast based recovery program. So he's done all the recording and editing of that, because that's his business, which is very handy. Um, but we were sitting there looking at the stuff that's on TikTok, and it's a bit challenging when you type in the word porn, which is what you'd need to do to find us. You need to type in porn addiction, porn recovery, or something, and all sorts of other stuff obviously starts coming up. But thinking, there is stuff on there, and actually, this is where we need Pivotal Recovery to be. But I'm quite ambivalent about it, because part of me wants to be a bit kind of like, I'm not going to go on TikTok. There's all this misinformation. There's all this, the Chinese will get us, whatever that's all about. But I kind of think that's probably what we've got to do. We do need to do some really crappy little videos, which my husband will hate doing, and put on TikTok.
Yeah, you probably need a 22-year-old boy or 22-year-old young man and 22-year-old young girl young woman to get on there and talk about that stuff if you can find one, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's so if we talk a lot about parenting and dads and that kind of thing, and predominantly we're talking to men with this podcast, but what can an individual like obviously my kids, so we had a little bit of an issue. My kids are 25 and 23, and we Tumblr at the time when they were mid-teens and that became essentially an underground porn site pretty quickly. So we had to kind of be a little bit more diligent in seeing what was going on with Tumblr and what sites they were on and the settings and all that. But you point out we actually had a computer set up in the kitchen at a little desk, and so that was as our kids were getting into that age, so we could kind of keep more of an eye on that. But like you said, one of the big deals now is that you don't need that. It's all it's on your smartphone. But what advice would you give to someone, kind of a dad of either preteens, I mean, even younger, but kind of dad of kids of that age? And how do we educate in an effective way with these kids and with the dangers and the implications and how to handle it and all of that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that you absolutely do have a porn blocker. You do have something on your kids' devices that helps protect them, and that's things like Net Nanny, Custodio are ones that I know of that are very good. And get educated yourself on how to do them, because I know parents who don't know which way up a phone goes and how to do it themselves. So you need to get a bit educated on this, and get a porn blocker on. And as far as it's not a fail safe, so please don't think it's a fail safe. It's a bit like locking your alcohol away, which is a sensible thing to do, and not leaving cigarettes lying around the house or whatever, and the sweetie cabinet open. It's common sense, but it's not going to stop them finding it. So that's the other mistake that parents make is, well, I'm sorted, I've got Net Nanny. If you want to know how to get around it, ask your child, unfortunately. But the more you
right.
Yeah, the more you can do, the better to actually put these defenses in place. And I think you're saying, look, this stuff is for adults. This stuff is called adult entertainment for a reason. And it's important for me that we do whatever we can so that you don't accidentally stumble on it and that your curiosity doesn't kind of get in the way, because there's plenty of time for that. There's plenty of other ways of accessing that. We don't do that now. So that's the first thing I would say, is that you do make sure you do that. The other thing is, I mean, it's all the stuff that we know about just being available for your kids to talk if they do have a problem, not shaming them, being open to those kinds of conversations, kind of probably nowadays assuming that porn is something that is talked about, that does go around the kind of playground, that's sort of fairly normal. I think we need to get more comfortable kind of talking about it generally. I think if kids see parents being painfully embarrassed by anything like that, they are not going to come and talk to you. Talk to your school as well, find out what they are doing in terms of educating around this stuff and being available for conversations about it. And yeah, just have good conversations about relationships, and when they're the right age, what feels age appropriate, talking about sex in relationships. And it's really about being open and available to having those conversations and putting sensible measures in place to make it so that they don't accidentally find it, but also so that if they do want to search for it, it's going to take a bit more effort. I mean, some families have rules about, they have the old, lockable cookie jar. So actually, when you go to bed, your phone goes in the cookie jar and it doesn't unlock until when you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Then you can have your phone back, and the whole household do it. They all put their phones in there, and that's kind of what they do. So I think there's sensible things like that. You can still buy alarm clocks. Some of my clients are surprised. A number of clients say, I have to take my phone to bed because I need an alarm clock, and you actually can buy them still. So buy your kids an alarm clock so they've got no excuse to have their phone. And yeah, but really, it's about being. So many parents are so naive about this stuff. So naive, and I think that
Mm.
there's also I kind of hear that. Well, I know my son wouldn't do that sort of thing. And you think, oh, and if he did, the last person he's going to talk to is you, because it's that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk. We do some marriage. We've done premarital crisis, some different marriage counseling. My wife and I, not on a professional level, just kind of couple to couple. And one of the things we talk about in regards to infidelity is as soon as you say they would never, you're off the rails. Like it's something that you need to be open and honest, so that whenever the situation arises that could become a problem, you have that discussion and talk through it. That
Yeah.
it's that being open and honest, and making sure that kids know that, hey, this is actually a problem, and here are the different levels of the problem, and here's how it can kind of manifest itself. And then really using that as a jumping off point, rather than using it as, hey, you should just the old Nancy Reagan thing, just say no, which
Yeah.
did not work in the least. Instead of doing that, it would be more of a, let's talk about the long-term emotional and relational implications if you develop a problem with this, and how you can progress in a healthy way. Seems like, would that be accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
One interesting thing that we've seen is, I was watching Dr. Andrew Huberman the other day, and he's a big one about cold therapy. We teach this. I have this little guide it's called Maxed Out Morning, but it's basically a morning routine that includes cold plunging. And he was talking about the latest research with, it was really, it's dopamine and norepinephrine that I think that they were talking mostly about, but they've studied the effects of cold therapy, and doing 3 minutes of cold therapy, and not extreme. Like I do 3 minutes at 50 degrees in the cold plunge, which is not too extreme. But he was saying that they've shown the spikes of those hormones and those chemicals last for up to 3 hours
Oh,
afterwards.
wow.
So it's this, if you're looking for alternatives to get kind of your dopamine hit, that jumping in a cold lake or jumping in a cold bath may be something that is interesting. So when you talk to, so what are some of the, and you don't have to give away any trade secrets or anything, but what are some of the things that you if obviously we want people to get in for help, if they're looking at some sort of addictive behavior, but what are some of the logistic things that you kind of teach for people to do to deal with this stuff?
So, so the Laurel Centre is a therapy centre. So it's kind of traditional psychotherapy. But when you're working with somebody with an addiction, it's very much a two-pronged approach. You need to look at what's going on underneath. What caused this? What's maintaining this issue? You want to stop. You should stop. So how come you're not? What's actually going on unconsciously that's continuing to drive this behavior? So you've got to look at that unconscious stuff, and you've got to do the practical, pragmatic behavior change stuff. So that is about identifying your triggers, practical relapse prevention. And interestingly, you talk about the cold plunge. So one of the things that we suggest to clients quite often is the cold shower, but for a bit of a different reason. One of the things that's really helpful when you do your 3 minutes or whatever you're doing, and we say to the guys, is just acknowledge this is uncomfortable. This is physically uncomfortable, but it's okay. It's okay. I can do discomfort, because all addictive behaviors and substances are a way of avoiding discomfort, whether it's emotional, psychological, or physical. It's a way of avoiding discomfort. And actually, life is uncomfortable at times. Get over it. You kind of got to get used to the fact that sometimes life's uncomfortable. And that can be a way of doing it, of just going, yeah, this is uncomfortable, but it's okay. So that's one of the sort of relapse prevention strategies that we suggest. The Pivotal Recovery, which is the podcast based self help course, is 60 sessions, and that works through the choice recovery model. And we use the choice recovery model when we're doing our face-to-face groups at the Laurel Centre and on the Hall Recovery course, and also then I've transposed it to this podcast-based system. And the choice recovery model, so choice is in part a philosophy that a lot of people use the language of addiction as a way of not taking responsibility. Well, I can't help it. I'm an addict. It's not my fault. I'm an addict. And actually, if you do have an addiction, you can't choose not to crave, but you can choose not to act out. Yeah, if you've got the desperate munches for something sweet, you can't actually, because you're so addicted to sugar, you can't choose not to have that sensation, but you can choose not to eat the cake. You can. That is, I'm telling you, you really can, Kevin. You can decide not to have it if you want to. So helping clients to see that actually their behaviour is a choice and they can choose this, I think, is really important. That's kind of the empowerment piece. But I think also conversely, it's helping guys to recognise that this pornography ultimately takes away your choices. If you want to be in a long-term relationship, if you want to continue to fancy your partner, yeah, and be sexually involved with them and aroused by them, porn is getting in the way of that. If you want to be a man of integrity with your kids and with your daughters and your daughters' friends as they're becoming sexual women, or men if you're gay, obviously you know what I'm saying, then actually you need to get off the porn. And porn ultimately for so many people gets in the way of the life that they really want to choose for themselves. To kind of so choice is kind of the philosophy of our approach, as well as being an acrostic for 6 stages. So the 6 stages of choice, the first C is about challenging faulty core beliefs. And the 2 most common faulty core beliefs you see in an addict is it's not a problem. It's just not a problem. And I said, well, okay, how will you know when it is? Let's really explore this. But the other one is I can't change. I can't. I've got a high sex drive. It's just how I'm wired up. I never commit to anything. I've always never had any willpower. I've got an addictive now. All these faulty core beliefs that say I can't change. Yeah, and they really sabotage recovery. So the first C of choice is challenge faulty core beliefs. Dig them out, identify them, overcome them. The H is about have a vision. Who is the person you want to be? Who is the man you want to be? What's the sex life that you want to have? Because addiction it ruins your sex life. It really does. I think often guys come for help initially.
Yeah.
They're terrified of giving up porn because they think they're going to become monks or something. And no, giving up sugar isn't giving up food. Heaven forbid. That's not what it is at all. It's about changing your relationship to food. That's what a healthy diet is. And we very much promote positive sexuality. And actually, what is your vision of who you want to be, the person you want to be, the relationship you want to have, the life you want to lead? And it's so much easier to be motivated towards something. I mean, so far in this, we've talked a lot about the harmful consequences. Yeah, that how you know you're an addict is causing all these problems. But actually, that's one motivator to avoid that. But actually, much, much better to be motivated towards what you want rather than what you're trying to avoid. So the H is about having a vision. The O is the practicalities of overcoming the behavior. So that's identifying your triggers, identifying the cognitive distortions that allow you to do it again and again and again and again, identifying all of that stuff, and the relapse prevention. So that's the really practical stuff. Try and remember how to spell choice. The I is about identifying positive sexuality. So what is positive sexuality for you? And obviously that is going to depend on your gender, on your sexual orientation, on your faith, perhaps, on your relationship status. And it's not for any of us to define what is positive for you. That's up to you to decide what your sexual boundaries are for your stage in life and age and so on and so forth. The next C is about connecting with others. So we know that for the vast majority of people who want to get into recovery from addiction, it's easier to do if they've got people around them, if they've got a support network. Um, one of the ways of thinking of addiction is that often people that turn to an addiction are turning to something for comfort rather than turning to people. So often there's a history of being let down by people, of being hurt by people, often right back into childhood. People weren't there for me when I needed them. I don't trust people. So when I need comfort, I'm going to turn to things. I'm going to turn to alcohol. I'm going to turn to drugs. I'm going to turn to sex because that won't let me down. It's people that do. So that second C of choice, connecting with others, is really, really critical for proving that message to be wrong. And the final E of choice is establish confident recovery. And there's a saying in the recovery world that recovery is about what you take up, not what you give up. So it's what are you going to do instead? Take up the piano. Take up doing this. What are your hobbies going to be? What you don't want a big hole in your life where this behavior used to be. Yeah, that's how people end up relapsing again. What are you going to do instead? What are the real positive things that are going to give your life a sense of meaning and purpose and direction? So that's the finally. So that's the choice recovery, and you need to work through those 6 items, and the podcasts basically talk you through all of those. And then there's an accompanying workbook as well. So you listen to your podcast on challenging faulty core beliefs, and then you do your homework. Look at me. You can't see this, but I'm illustrating this with a pen and paper, which obviously it isn't. It's all online these days. Just proves how old I am. But with the interactive workbook, you then do your kind of homework to really personalise it to you, and then you do the next podcast, and it kind of works on. But it leads people through the choice recovery model.
Oh, I love that. I mean, so one of the reasons I do the cold plunge is, and I also do this thing called an assault bike, which is, I don't do CrossFit, but it's this basically arms and legs. It's the big fan and all that. And so I do high intensity exercise on that. But one of the reasons I do it is because I don't want to do it. It sucks. Both of those things suck every time. Like they don't get there. There is no like cardiovascular fitness with the bike that gets, once I get more fit, it gets easier. No, it sucks every time. And it sucks every time that I get into the water, into the cold water. And I love the fact that you choose, but I do it because I want to show myself that I'm in control. That and I always joke, and there's a podcaster, Joe Rogan, regardless of what you think of him, he talks about how I prove to myself every day that my inner little bitch doesn't control my behavior. So and basically that just means that I'm in control of the actions regardless of what my predispositions are to not want to do it. So I love the fact that it's something that you can you're not a victim to your own addictions. I think
absolutely
is something that I really like. Well, that is, all of this is super helpful and super interesting to me. If you have any less thoughts, I'd love to hear them, but I want to also know where to find the podcast. If we have resources, obviously you're in the UK and Europe. If there's a kind of a directory of somewhere to go, or kind of, are we looking for people that do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapists, kind of talk to that. But I want to know exactly how to find you, how to find the podcast, and how we can begin to get help.
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcasts, obviously, they're all in English, so it's the whole of the English-speaking world that are using the podcast. So that's at pivotalrecovery.org. So pivotalrecovery.org. That's where you can find the Pivotal Recovery course, the podcast self-help. In terms of the other work we do, the laurelcentre.co.uk. You can also Google Paula Hall and you'll find me and all of this stuff as well. But the laurelcentre.co.uk. Interestingly, since we've always done some work online on Zoom, because we've always had quite a lot of international clients. Since COVID, none of our clients went face to face. We had 2 offices in the UK, one in London and one further north. And obviously we had to close them during lockdown, but I assumed that once we got through COVID, we'd be open again and we'd do the groups again. The vast majority of people do not want to come back to face. So we now have loads of online groups that we run. So we do the online programs, and we have an increasing number of people from the States. There's a bit of a time difference, which is a challenge sometimes. But it's one of the things that we're kind of looking at changing, because in some ways it can be quite easy, because it means we don't have to work evenings, because our evenings, your evening's not our evening, you know what I'm saying? So you can do things at different times of day. So yeah, do get in touch with the Laurel Centre if you're interested in therapy and you don't mind working online. If that's not right for you, then I think there are a number of therapists in the US, but make sure you're talking to someone who does specialise in sex and porn addiction. That's the real critical thing. The training organisation, or the one that I know best in the States, and there's a few of them, but the one that I know best are the CSATs. So that's the Certified Sex Addiction Therapists. So I did some CSAT training many years ago. But yeah, the Certified Sex Addiction Therapists, CSATs, to have a look at them, and they're the ones that I know best. But I know there's quite a few other organised. But just make sure it's someone that's trained, because this isn't just about a high sex drive. It's much more complicated, and it's definitely not about giving up sex. It's about really embracing it. And I think there is such a masculinity issue that gets tied up in this, and I think our society is really struggling at the moment with, I do feel for you guys, because you've got to man up and you've got to grow some and you've got to be all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you're meant to be sensitive and you're meant to be caring, and and you've still got to be the ones that wine and dine and seduce and all those things in a positive way. But, hashtag me too, you mustn't be too. It is so hard being a guy these days. I'm so glad I'm not one. So tough. And I think you really want a therapist that's got a real sense of positive masculinity as well, that really shares your own kind of value system about the man you want to be.
That fits perfectly to everything that we're trying to help these guys do in lots of different ways. So this has been super interesting. Yeah, definitely. I think telehealth, honestly, for someone like me, has been the best part of the COVID thing, because I do some. I see I have a psychiatrist that I see for some stuff, but like It's about an hour and a half round trip for me. And so being able to go in and do that remotely via telehealth has been pretty nice for me. So, well, thank you very much, you guys. I will also link these on the BuzzFeed, and it'll come out on all the platforms. We'll have the links to all of this stuff too. So we'll be able to do that. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your, evening there. So, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Kevin. Enjoyed it. Thanks.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.